Greetings my friends, it's Top Hat here, and welcome to part 2 of my guide to Airsoft Gas Blowback upgrading. In this part we're going to be mostly talking about things that increase or decrease or more or less affect the FPS of your gas blowbacks. There are three main parts that really affect FPS. There are other parts that can or may not, but these are the three main areas you'd focus on if you really want to change your FPS. First of which is your magazine valve, if you want to increase or decrease it. If you want to increase it, you can go with a high flow valve. Like I meant, we talked more about magazines and these valves in the first video. Like I mentioned, in gas pistols, high flows may or may not make too big of a difference because the barrel is so short. It kind of depends on your gun. I've seen them make absolutely no difference at all, and I've seen them make 15 FPS difference. So best thing to do is try it out and see what happens. It just depends so much on your particular model. Like I said, that was already talked about, magazines in the first part. The next way to adjust your FPS more marginally is with tight bore barrels. If you want to increase your FPS, switching to a 6.01 can be a pretty good way to get some more FPS, more power. Looser bore barrels can decrease your power as well. And in gas blowbacks, since they actually have expanding gases, whereas AEGs are more like really fancy blowguns and don't necessarily have gas expansion like gas blowbacks do, a longer barrel on a gas blowback will give the gas more time to expand behind the BB, so a longer barrel can increase your power in a gas gun, whereas doesn't necessarily, it's not really that simple in AEGs, but in gas blowbacks, a longer barrel can increase your power. Same with a tighter bore barrel, but we'll talk more about barrels and hop-up units in the third part of this video series where we go more in depth into accuracy. The second part, which we're going to talk about mostly in depth in this video, is in your blowback unit here. In your blowback unit you have the blowback unit and the piston, which we'll talk about in the third video regarding accuracy. And as for this video here, we will talk about the nozzle and the cylinder valve, that the cylinder valve as I call it, which resides inside your nozzle. This is the port that contacts with your magazine's ejection port. So inside your air nozzle here is also a pretty important upgrade part, which is your cylinder valve. As a general explanation of how gas blowbacks cycle, when the trigger is pulled, the hammer strikes this pin or this valve on the back of the magazine. The valve is depressed, gas flows out of the magazine to the, duster port and into the intake here on the air nozzle. And when the gas flows into your air nozzle, there will be this cylinder valve here, which will be forward or pushed open by the spring. Some of the gas will flow into the ports on your cylinder valve, and the gas that flows into the ports will flow out of your air nozzle and down your barrel, and that will be the gas that propels the BB out of your gun and shoots the projectile. And as the gas continues to flow into the air nozzle, the pressure buildup in the air nozzle will push the valve closed against the spring. And when this valve seals with the front of your air nozzle, there is no longer a place for the gas to escape in your air nozzle. So when that pressure buildup occurs in the air nozzle, once the cylinder valve closes, the pressure pushes against the blowback unit, and that causes the air nozzle to jut forward, and this motion of the air nozzle moving forward is what causes the gun to cycle and blow back and load in the next round and be ready to fire again. Now there are two main styles of ways that the cylinder valves are held together here. Sometimes you will have just a simple pin that goes through your nozzle and holds your valve and spring in place, or in some Marui models like I have here, you will have a screw on the top that once removed you will see 3 main parts fall out from your air nozzle. This part here is simply to hold things in place, so you don't really need to worry about that too much. Before I talk about the air nozzle itself, I will talk about your bulb. This is simply the spring that's used to reset the valve after it cycles. I believe this is the increased spring from the Dyna piston head set, though I'll probably switch that back to the stock spring because theoretically a stronger spring should keep the valve open longer, which will increase your volume output of gas, which I don't think is necessary for such a short barrel and pistol. But it will also decrease efficiency because it will cause, more gas to be blown out for the cycle. There are 3 main styles of cylinder bulb. Well, actually there's a bunch, but 3 main shapes. You've got your stock cylinder bulb, your high flow cylinder bulb, which is basically the same concept as the magazines I was telling you about earlier, where the stock has a smaller area for gas to vent, since it has 4 bridges, whereas the high flow cylinder bulb has 2 bridges, so it has more area for the gas to escape. So this allows more gas to flow out your barrel, or a larger puff of initial gas to flow out. So in gas pistols, normally the high flow valve maybe gets you like 5 to 10 FPS increase, depending on your gun itself and what ammo you're using and your gas can and various other aspects. But typically your bulb does not, it can theoretically get you a bit more FPS, but if you're using 0.25 grams or under, you're probably best bet just to stick with the cylinder bulb, the stock cylinder bulb. Another thing to consider with cylinder valves is the material they're made of. The heavier the cylinder valve, the more force it's going to take for the gas to get it to move. So when you have a steel cylinder valve, or a metallic one, if it weighs more than your stock plastic valve, then it'll hold the valve open longer and get you more of an output. So this one's 0.7 grams. The stock one is not even, oh, there it is, 0.4 grams. So that's a pretty minuscule difference, but depending on what you make your valves out of, you can get them pretty heavy if you do some metallic 3D printing and things like that. There is a third type of valve that I call rocket valve. These would be your bulb style valves, and this would be your rocket style valve. So the difference here is that the valve, or the rocket style, this one is 3D printed out to be used with the cylinder spring in my 226. I never really noticed a huge difference when using this valve because the barrel is so short, but I certainly noticed my efficiency differences. The difference here is instead of having little bridges or whatnot and the gas flowing around through the tube and in through these holes, instead it has just a 360 window around in which the gas can flow in and flow down past these fins. So the rocket valves are very popular in KJW, sorry, no, not KJW, KWA gas blowbacks, pistols and rifles, I believe. I don't have any KWA valves available to show you, but typically in those you will have a longer spring that reaches to the base of the rocket valve. Personally, I'm a big fan of rocket valve styles myself. I find them to get better consistency and just generally a better accuracy noticeably when I switch between them, but they require a longer spring. So in a gun like my 226 here, when I'm limited by the short spring, I can't necessarily just drop in a KWA valve, but in some other guns like my KJW 1022 or KCO2, I do actually use a stock KWA pistol spring because I can get the extended spring with the RA Tech M4 NPAS. So, sorry if I confused you, but if you're working on a KWA pistol, you will probably see a rocket style valve like this. If you're working with a Marui style pistol or Marui clone, you will likely see bulbs. Personally, I prefer the rocket valve, and I will often adapt my Marui variant gas blowbacks to use rocket valves, but otherwise, you know, it just depends on what's available. Sometimes you can't work with it. So for my 226 here, I had the high flow bulb in it, but I'm probably going to switch to the low flow since I'm not going to use it on HPA anymore. I'm just going to put it in a holster and use it as a sidearm with gas blowback. But that's the main difference in valves here. High flow valves can get you a little more FPS sometimes at the cost of efficiency, whereas low flow valves will get you a little lower FPS and better efficiency. There are also, if you're looking to decrease your gas blowback gun's FPS, typically you're going to want to look for an upgraded valve like an NPAS or something like that. The way the NPAS works, which I actually happen to have one for my KCO2 here. So the way an NPAS valve here would work and why its FPS is adjustable is that you can actually change cool thing about an NPAS valve here is that you can actually adjust the length of it. So the longer it is, the shorter distance it's going to have to travel to close, and your less distance it'll take for the gun to start cycling. The faster it closes, the less FPS you will have because it will take less power to get the gun to cycle. So there are plenty of options for valves. Typically, if you have like a gas blowback rifle or something that's a little too high powered, you want to lower it, you could look for an NPAS. I know for the KCO2 here, this is actually an M4, a KJW M4 NPAS that works in the KCO2. That's also the fun part of gas blowbacks, is that there's a lot of cross compatibilities between parts. For example, the Tokyo Marui High Kappa increased hammer springs actually fit the KWA M93R basically perfectly, but don't actually do that because your 3-round burst will stop functioning if you use an increased hammer spring for some reason. See, there I go again with problems of increased hammer springs, huh? But that's it for the various types of valve, cylinder valves. Like I said, personally recommend rocket valves if you can get them, but otherwise cylinder bulbs are alright, though I don't see as good performance with them. Okay, now onto the nozzle itself. There are upgrade nozzles available. I've heard of people reporting increase in FPS due to nozzle changes. I'm not really sure how that would work, honestly, but I've tested out a few nozzles. The thing to know about nozzles is there are ones of varying hardness and flexibility and things like that. Personally, I feel like this is more of a durability upgrade, upgrading your nozzle itself. I mean, I guess I could see how an upgraded nozzle could potentially increase your FPS if, like, maybe the upgraded one just has better dimensions for contacting the bucking, or it just gets a better seal with your piston, or just things like that. Or maybe there was a small crack in your old air nozzle that you didn't notice. For instance, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but like right in here, there's a little blob of JB weld. There was a small crack. If you want to test and see if there are any cracks or anything like that in your nozzle, what you can do is plug the holes all but one with your fingers and then just blow into the other side, and you'll be able to tell pretty easily if there are any cracks in it, because obviously no air should escape if you're plugging all the holes. Some people say that, you know, it's good to be careful when you upgrade your nozzles. For instance, I have a Shooter's Design palm nozzle here that I was recommended because it was supposed to, someone reported that theirs increased FPS, so I gave it a shot. Did not affect my FPS, didn't notice any sort of performance changes, but what did happen is the little loading finger here on the nozzle did bend, whereas the, I don't remember which brand this is, but it's not the stock nozzle. So yeah, some people report changes in FPS due to nozzles. I've never seen that myself, but I mean, I can see how that could be possible, but there's just so many factors that may or may not affect your gun. If your standard nozzle doesn't have any cracks, or the one you have, and gets a good seal with everything, and you're upgrading your pistol on a budget, an upgraded air nozzle is probably the upgrade I would recommend that you skip, but in some cases I guess it could probably affect your performance or maybe durability, but the more flexible ones I would be skeptical of personally. Like I said, I'm sure there's some people out there that may or may not disagree with me. So now let's talk about KWAs. The main area that KWA gas blowbacks differ from Marui style is in the air nozzle, particularly the cylinder bulb style setup. Like I was mentioning, Maruis have a bulb typically, whereas looks like I destroyed another recoil spring. Fun fact, most gas blowback pistols, you don't actually need cylinder return springs. They're largely superfluous. The just regular cycling of the gun's going to move this thing around all it needs to be moved. But you'll see this one has a cup style O-ring here. Not the best seal, but there's not really any aftermarket O-ring piston heads or cups, and I can't exactly get the piston out of here, so good enough hopefully. But the main area that the KWA system here differs is in the cylinder, and the difference is this one has a pin style here where it's you just push the pin out. My KCO2 actually has this pin style, even though it's KJW, though I do believe it was designed by Tenio Koba. I don't know. But once you pull the pin out, be sure to have your thumb covering the backside of your piston here, because when you pull the pin, it's going to launch your cylinder bulb. This is an aftermarket Angel valve, which actually is performing pretty well for me. I do like it, but this is the yeah. So the difference here is that instead of having a bulb that the rats, I just dropped my spring. So as I was saying, the rocket valve differs mostly in that it requires a longer spring, and the spring rests on the back portion of the valve, rather than the bulb style, which has the spring resting on the front portion of the bulb. But yeah, that's the main difference between the KWA and the Marui gas blowbacks. Otherwise, most of the concepts behind the upgrade parts are pretty similar. I mean, they both have barrels, they both have hop-ups. Oh yeah, the hop-up is also different on the KWA. It's sort of like a ramp in here, and as you twist it, it pushes down more or less on the hop-up. If you have a KWA, I recommend just getting an Evo 2 Maple Leaf set. Highly recommended. Other than that, you could probably get maybe an aftermarket bucking or something, but there's less upgrade options for KWA hop-up setups. Also keep a note that any hole in any part that gas flows through is a potential point for leakage. So if you want to go really crazy for screws and things like that, you can always put a little dab of gasket maker around it. Gasket maker is good for making seals because it gets a good seal on things, but unlike a regular adhesive like JB Weld or super glue, you can just take a screw and break gasket maker. It doesn't like really grip things, which is pretty nice. And that concludes part 2 of my in-depth guide to Airsoft gas blowback upgrading. If you want to see part 1 or part 3, do check the video description as there will be links there. If you have any questions or comments, or you think I did something wrong or anything like that, or your own opinion you want to share, please do leave me a comment. I respond to nearly everything. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something or at least enjoyed the video.